Jewish home. I was raised in a very secular home and basically educated in secular thinking, and I was basically educated in, what everybody calls postmodernism, even though I wouldn't have known it by the name. And the essence of what I was taught and what I was raised on is that there is no truth. I mean truth with a capital T. There is no overarching, to use postmodernist language, there is no overarching meta-narrative. There is no one grand story that explains the world, that explains culture, that explains morality. You can have your truth and your narrative and your morality, and that's your morality. And you can have your truth and your morality and your narrative, and that's yours. And it doesn't matter that simple logic and common sense would say, well, if your narrative and your truth is right, then yours has to be a lie because they're contradictory. But that just didn't sort of enter into the mind. It was just everything is relative, everything is cultural, everything is subjective. And that's how I was raised, that's how I was educated, and that's how I passionately believed. Well, one day, I was about 20 years old, and I was sitting in a pizza parlor at the University of Florida in Gainesville, Florida. And I was always somewhat of a seeker, and always somewhat I liked philosophy, and I always liked to ask a lot of questions. And I was sitting in this pizza parlor, and I'm eating a pizza and drinking, say a non-Adventist beverage. And I'm reading a philosopher. And the guy I'm reading, his name is Benedict de Spinoza. And maybe some of you know Spinoza, maybe you're not, you're wasting your time, really. But at the time, I'm reading this guy in this pizza parlor, and he says something that right then and there in that pizza parlor just changed my life over a pizza. And what he said was something to the effect of, in order to live the most perfect life upon the earth, you needed to find out the reason why you were here and live your life accordingly. Okay? And now for some reason, those words were almost like a prefrontal lobe lobotomy. Those words just went right into my mind, and in that instant, all that subjectivism, all that postmodernism, all that relativism, everything that I had been raised on and educated, it was like just took a shiv and just wiped it all out. Because at that moment, I realized that truth had to exist. What do I mean? Well, look, there was this pizza. Okay? This is my pizza theology. This was an epiphany for me, so just let me work through it. There's this pizza sitting on the table in front of me. Now, you could have taken 1,000 different people, and they could have had 1,000 different explanations and views and beliefs in their mind how the pizza got there. They could have think the god Marduk created the pizza. They could have think Allah created the pizza. They could have thought aliens from Venus came in a flying saucer and put the pizza there. They could have thought the pizza evolved out of the ground. I mean, you could have had 1,000 different people with 1,000 different views they would have died for or killed for. They could have started religions on their belief on how the pizza got there. And the fact was, maybe every single last one of those views was totally and completely wrong. That was irrelevant. All that mattered was that the pizza was there. And somewhere out there in the universe, somewhere, there was an explanation for the pizza, for the origin and purpose of the pizza. As I said, maybe nobody knew what it was, maybe nobody ever could know what it was, but that explanation, that origin, whatever that was the truth about the pizza. And well, at that moment, I just stepped back, and it just suddenly hit me. You know, here's the world. Here's the universe. I mean, here I am. There is a reality here. I don't care how they don't filtered through the mind and all that Kantian stuff. That's all fine and dandy. Not worried about that. There is a reality. There is something out here. And in the same way that something had to explain the pizza, as I said, maybe nobody could ever know what it was, didn't stop the fact that still there had to have been an explanation. The explanation for the pizza. And that moment, it just hit me in that pizza parlor. I mean, it was like earth-shattering for me, because it suddenly hit me that somewhere out there is this universe here. Somewhere out there has to be a truth. The truth that explains the existence of the world, that explains the existence of the universe. In the same way, there had to somewhere be a truth that explained the pizza. And whatever that explanation was, whatever that was that explained it, that was the truth. And I realized it had to exist. And and that moment, it was amazing to me what just was going through my mind. And you might think, took you 21 years to come to that. Mickey Mouse could have told you that. But the fact is, had you not been raised the way I was raised and educated the way I was educated, everything I had been taught and educated and raised went against me coming to that conclusion. And I'll never forget, I was 21 years old, and I'm walking through that pizza parlor in Gainesville, Florida. And I walk out of the pizza parlor, and I'm walking through the streets of Gainesville. And don't ask me why, but I remember I just felt this pain. It was almost painful inside my heart. It was like I thought, if it were humanly possible, because suddenly I knew that truth had to exist. The truth had to exist. And up and for my whole life, that was just an inconceivable concept. And I suddenly realized that the truth, whatever it was, had to exist. And I remember thinking to myself, if it is humanly possible to know this truth, because I realized even though the truth had to exist, I realized it might not be possible to know it. You know what I'm saying? The fact that I suddenly hit me that there has to be the truth doesn't logically follow that I could ever know what it was. But I can remember 21, I'm walking through the streets, and I got this thing in me thinking, if it's humanly possible to know truth, to know the truth, to know how we got here, where we came from, just these basic questions. I remember thinking I wanted to know it. I didn't care where it led me, what it cost me, what I had to suffer, what I had to give up. I thought if I could know it, I wanted to know it no matter what. I just can't describe what it was. Why me at 21? It was almost this sacred thing, for lack of a better term. I thought if I could know it, I wanted to know it, no matter where it led me, no matter what it cost me, no matter what I had to suffer, no matter what I had to give up. If I could know it, I wanted to know it no matter what. And all I know is about 3 years later, of all the different ways I could have gone, all the different paths, and I got in all of them, some of the most nonsense you could believe. Marxist phase for a while. I got into some of the stupidest nonsense you could imagine. But of all the different paths I could have gone, all the different ways I could have wound up, I ended up becoming a Seventh-day Adventist. Now, that's remarkable for a lot of reasons. Because, first of all, there were two kinds of people in my life that I used to hate. I used to hate Christians, and I'm real serious about this too, I used to hate vegetarians. I'm serious. I was so carnivorous. I was so into eating meat. I'd meet vegetarians. I mean, I'm not kidding you. I wanted to spit in their veggies. I thought it was so ludicrous. I could tell you some very obnoxious stories about that, but I remember people saying, you're really offending me by what you're saying to these vegetarians, and I just, whatever. But anyway, now my animosity, though, towards Christians was a little deeper seated than that, though. Because even though I wasn't raised a religious Jew and barely ever went to synagogue or anything, a few times I went, I just couldn't stand it. But I was definitely raised aware I was a Jew, and I was just so bitter over all the persecution through the centuries done by the church in the name of Jesus to the Jews. The Crusaders rolled in Jerusalem in one year. These Christians with their crosses rounded up all the Jews, men, women, and children, put them in a synagogue, and burned them alive while the Christians were singing hymns to Jesus. All the way through history, the persecution. I mean, this is Europe. I mean, this is where it all happened. All the way through. I mean, even England. I mean, you were a little bit better here than other places. You didn't murder too many of us here, just a few. Not like on. And all this stuff went on and on, all through history. And all this stuff. And it culminates. I remember reading a story at the Holocaust, how on Christmas Eve, these Nazis, these SS guards, probably just went out, lined up a couple hundred Jews, shot men, women, and children, threw them in a ditch and burned them, and covered it up. Then went in for Christmas Eve and drank their schnapps and were singing Silent Night, Holy Night, and the tears streaming down their eyes as they're singing to the Virgin on Christmas Eve. All this done in Christian lands by people who went to church, many of them baptized, went to church. I never heard of one Christian, quote Christian, anybody ever disfellowshipped or disciplined by their church for taking part in the Holocaust. You ever hear of any church anywhere they disciplined, they murdered some Jews? Well, we think maybe you ought to take your name off the books because you just did that, I don't think it ever happened. So all this, I was bitter about all this, and I used to vent my anger out. On this hellfire and brimstone preacher. His name was Jed Smock. And Jed used to come to the University of Florida at Gainesville, where I was in college. And Jed would just get out there, and he'd stand on the crowd on the campus, and he'd start preaching hellfire and brimstone. And there'd be a crowd of students would get in a big circle around him, and Jed would stand there, and he would just, so on and so forth. Well, I was never content to stand with the kids in the circle. I used to get in the center of the circle. I'd get on his heels. I'd curse him. I'd curse his mother. I mean, I could have gotten arrested for the stuff I did to this guy. And this guy was a charismatic. And he used to put his hands on my head and speak in tongues and try to cast demons out of me. And I'd start drooling and writhing. I would get on the ground. It was a show. And this went on. Eventually, my friends nicknamed me Heckle because I was out there haranguing this guy because in many ways, he just sort of embodied for me all this Christianity, this crusading kind of Christianity. Well, anyway, that went on until I graduated college. And it was 1976, 77, 78, and I graduated college. And at that time of my life, I had one goal in my life. From the time I was a little kid, I knew I was going to be a novelist or I was going to be nothing. Just going to be a novelist. I have writers and editors and novelists in my family, just in my blood. I just knew I was going to be a novelist. It just really never entered my mind that I was ever going to be or could be anything else. And I had started a novel my senior year at college. And before long, the novel consumed me. And all that mattered to me was writing this book. Nothing else mattered. It was my life. I mean, I just got done with school, even though I was an English major. Outside of a few poetry classes, I didn't think it helped me that much. I just wanted to work on my novel. and I had put about a year in the novel. And then I went back home. I graduated college, and I went home to Miami Beach. This is where I grew up. I grew up in Miami Beach. And I was there a little while, and I had a little bit of money left over from college, and I decided, I'm going to go over to Europe and work on the novel in Europe, because I had been to Europe numerous times before. I had lived overseas. I had bummed my way around the world. I had lived in Sweden, and I roughed it a lot when I was younger. And I was going to base part of my novel on places in Europe. So I have a little bit of money left over, and I come over to England. Okay, and I'm bumming around. I got this stamp on my passport. They almost didn't let me in because I didn't have a return ticket. I had to really just wheedle my way through that customs guy without that return ticket. But I got this stamp on my passport telling me I'm only allowed to be here a month and I can't work and so on. And I came over here to want to find a job. So I don't know. So I'm bumming around, and believe it or not, I wound up in a Catholic monastery on Tenby Island off the coast of Wales. And I was there about 3 days, and the monks threw me off the island. Okay, I'm not going to go into all that. I got kicked off the island. So then I decided, all right, I'm going to go to Sweden. Because I had lived in Sweden. I knew the language. I had some friends. So I hitchhiked. I practically walked through Wales. You ever try to hitchhike in Wales? I practically walked through Wales. And I get to the coast, and I take a boat. And I take a boat from England to Holland. And the whole time I'm hitchhiking, it's raining on me. It rains over here sometimes. And then I get to Holland, and I'm landing in Holland, and as much as it rains more over there. And I'm getting off the boat, and it's soaking, and it's raining, and I'm just hitchhiking, and I'm going to hitchhike this. And I'm walking down the gangplank, and there happens to be a guy ahead of me with a backpack, like I did. And on the backpack, he's got a sign that says Greece. And suddenly I'm starting thinking, I'm going to go to Sweden? And it snows up there. So I walk up to this guy and said, you hitching to Greece? And he says, yeah. And I said, hey, what a coincidence, so am I. Let's hitchhike to Greece together. Just like that, I changed my mind. Just like that. So two guys in the back with backpacks in the rain. I got to watch my time here. Two guys in the backpacks with rain don't get for rides, and we finally split up. And I'm hitchhiking on my own to Greece. And it takes me 4 long, hard, hot days. Again, I thought Wales was bad. I practically walked through Yugoslavia. And I get to Athens. And I had a friend who had lived in the city. And he says, come to Athens, come visit me. I can find you a job or something. So I knock on this guy's. I finally get to this guy's house late in the day. After 4 days on the road, it was a hard haul. Believe me, it might sound glamorous, but it was one royal pain in the neck. But though I get to the guy's house, and I knock on the door in the middle of Athens, and this little old lady comes out. And I say, is Faunus here? And she says, Faunus no here. Faunus in Miami. Okay? And I let out a wail, and I guess the woman felt sorry for me. She gave me a meal, and an hour later, I'm back out in the streets of Athens. I have no idea where I'm going to go, what I'm going to do. To say I was slightly bummed out would have been an understatement. And my biggest concern is, where am I going to sleep? Because I didn't have that much money. And so there were just some bushes along a wall near the house. And I just laid out my sleeping bag in the bushes and lay down, and I went to sleep. And I had a dream. Now, you got to understand me at this point of my life. I was what you'd call a hardcore philosophical materialist. If you couldn't explain it through physics, through chemistry, through molecular biology or something, it didn't exist. There was no such thing as a transcendental realm or a supernatural realm, What you dreamt, depended on what you ate for dinner, what was in your genes, and if your mother breastfed you long enough or not. That was all that it was to me. But I went to sleep. And as I was sleeping, I was dreaming. I was dreaming that when I woke up, I dreamt that I booked a ticket to Israel and flew to Israel to live on a kibbutz and write my novel. That was my dream. I wake up and I crawl out of the sleeping bag and I suddenly think of the dream and I think, hey, that's not a bad idea. And right across the street was a travel agency. And for some reason, I don't know why, this was way back, like 1978, for some reason in my mind, I always remember that the agency opened at 9 in the morning. And I go over, I book a ticket to Israel, fly to Israel, and 2-3 days later, I'm on a kibbutz. You know what kibbutzes are, huh? Most kibbutz, they're like little self-supporting, they're like communes, they got scattered. Most people in Europe know it. Americans don't know anything beyond the shores of the States. But I was on this kibbutz right on the edge of the Galilee, and I had to work 30 hours a week, and the rest of the time was mine, just to work on my novel. And I loved it. I loved it. I mean, I just worked 30 hours a week, and then I could do nothing, because all that mattered to me was writing my novel. Nothing else mattered. I was 22 years old. My life was writing this book. Well, I'm on this kibbutz just a few months, and who should show up but a group of 12 fundamentalist Christians from America. There are these folks who are kind of wrapped up in Israel and the Jews and all the prophecies are going to take place in the Middle East. 200 million man Chinese army is going to come down and attack Israel in the Valley of Megiddo in the Battle of Armageddon, and the church is going to get raptured to heaven during the 7-year tribulation, and 144,000 Jewish virgins of the 12 tribes of Israel are going to preach the gospel while the church is raptured, and all this. I mean, we can laugh at this silliness, but these people take it seriously, and they were there to be silent witnesses to the Jews. Well, I was furious. I mean, here I was in the boony of the only Jewish state since the Bar Kokhba rebellion in AD 135, and here are all these Christians. So I start haranguing them and harassing them and because I had years of practice with that other guy. And eventually it got so bad the Jews on the kibbutz said, if you don't leave these people alone, we're going to throw you out because you're causing too much trouble. Well, the monks just threw me out, right? It's one thing a bunch of monks are going to get rid of me, but my own people, the Jews, are going to throw me out. So I just backed off. I just left them alone because I didn't want to hassle with it. I liked working on my novel. Well, anyway, a number of months go by, and this other guy shows up who's part of the Christian group. And if there's anything in the world that was just the lowest of the low, if there was anything that was worse than being a believer in Jesus, if there was anything that in my thinking you have reached the dregs of humanity, it was not to be someone that believed in Jesus. That was bad enough. It was to be a Jew who believed in Jesus. And this guy comes as part of the group who's a Jew who believes in Jesus. So I started haranguing him and harassing him and giving him such a hard time. And yet this guy was very deep. And he was very intelligent. And I really couldn't quite put that together. I kind of grew up believing the Bible was nothing but the rantings and ravings of a bunch of flea-bitten camel herders. They got tired of lugging these big stone idols around the desert. So they made up some notion of some God they couldn't see, said he was one, named him Yahweh, and that was the religion of the Bible. It was late Bronze Age camel herder myths. And so I couldn't understand how any educated, intelligent guy could take this stuff seriously. And yet this guy was very bright and very deep, and we would get into these discussions. And I'll never forget one day he gave me an answer, and I remember going back to my room, and it was like the first time in my life It was the first time in my life I remember going back up to my room and thinking, looking up and thinking, maybe there is some big mama or some big daddy up there. I mean, some of the stuff made sense. Well, anyway, the bottom line is I'm on the kibbutz for a year. And then I decide I've been working on my novel there and I want to get out. After a while, it was just starting to go stir crazy. I wanted to get out. So I decided to leave it. I'm going to go back to Europe and work on some more on the novel because all that mattered to me was working on the book. So I leave Israel and I hitchhike up and I end up going into Copenhagen. And in the middle of Copenhagen, there had been there's two other things I've got to, I can't believe I almost forgot this. There's two details I want to give you why I was on the kibbutz. Two important details that come into play later. When I was on the kibbutz and working on my novel, I did nothing but I read so much poetry. I live to read poetry. I still like to read a lot of poetry. And I was reading poetry, and there was one book of poems by this woman named Sylvia Plath that really had probably more. Yeah, she killed herself here in London, I think. Yeah. In fact, it was so heavy, she wrote this poem. She gives her kids cookies and milk, goes down, writes this poem, and then sticks her head in an oven and kills herself, in downtown London somewhere. So it was heavy stuff. But nobody impacted me more than the writings of Sylvia Plath, particularly this one book. Just profoundly influenced me. Also, when I was on the kibbutz, I had a blonde Danish girlfriend. Her name was Tina. Okay, so just remember Sylvia Plath and remember a girl from Blonde named Tina. But anyway, I'm on the kibbutz for a year, and I'm working, and then I finally decide after that I'm going to go over to Europe and work on the novel in Europe. So I go over, and I end up going to Copenhagen, and I'm there in Copenhagen for a while, and things didn't work out. They had this vast military barracks in the center of Copenhagen, and the army had abandoned it years earlier. And they're like all these squatters. It's called Christenia. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It's like this big slum in the middle of the place. And I ended up hanging out around there. And I was there 2 days, and I ended up getting a fight with some guy. And I get in the fight, and he pulls a knife on me. And I had to have all the hassles with that. So I wasn't having a good time there. And then on top of it, I had a friend who lived in Copenhagen, who I had met on an earlier trip. And this guy was really into the occult. I didn't know anything about this stuff. But I'd go to this guy's apartment, and it was very, very creepy. And I'll never forget, at one point, this guy used to get in these drunken stupors. And he'd sit in a chair. For days on end, he'd just sit in a chair, and he'd moan, and he'd howl, and he'd shriek. And he'd urinate in his pants because he'd never get up. And I remember looking at this guy one day, and he had all this occult stuff, and this was so pathetic. And I remember I figured this guy's desperate. I don't know what to say to him. So of all people, I say to him something about Jesus. Okay, I figured anything. And I'll never forget, as soon as I mention the name Jesus, this guy stops. He looks up at me with one eye. One eye. He looks up at me and says, 20 years ago, I asked for Jesus. Instead, I got the devil. Okay, now I didn't know back then Jesus, the devil, Buddha, Moses, the good tooth fairy. It was all the same mishigas to me. If you don't know mishigas, it's a Yiddish word. It's all the same crazy stuff to me. But I just got out of there. He totally freaked me out. And then I left. And I ended up going to Paris. And again, I'm running out of time here, so there's some things I'm leaving out here. But I get to Paris, and let's just say things are not going well for me. Things are going down. I'm in Paris. I don't know anybody. I just had to get out of Copenhagen. I had to get out of Christenia, that place just. And I'm in Paris, and I have no idea where I'm going to go, what I'm going to do. And then things are going down. And it was the first time in my life where I was in a situation and I said, okay, I can do A, I can do B, or I can kill myself. In fact, and I'll never forget, too, I even saw the Eiffel Tower, and the thought entered my mind, I want to just jump off the Eiffel Tower. And as soon as I had that thought, this other idea popped into my mind. And the thought was, hang on, because maybe this Jesus stuff is true. It was almost as soon as that thought popped into my mind, boop, that thought came in and popped it out. And then yet, as soon as I had that, I just started to curse myself. I said, look at you. Your whole life, you always viewed religious people as weak people. Oh, they couldn't handle the hard knocks of life. They couldn't handle, so they had their little invisible little bunny rabbit that they said their prayers to at night, and it made them feel better. And they had their crutch, and wasn't that nice, and on and on and on. And my whole life, it was, I despised people like that. I thought it was so weak and so cheap and so shallow. And then I said, and now look at you. For the first time in your miserable 23 years, you feel like you can't handle it. So you're going to reach out to some God and make yourself feel better. And I said, no way. I was too honest, a seeker for truth, to reach out and believe a lie, no matter how good the lie made me feel. I would have rather have jumped off that Eiffel Tower and been squashed dead like a grape, rather than live a lie, no matter how good the lie made me feel. In other words, I was too honest a seeker for truth. And I remember I stopped, and I don't know whether I shook my fist up in the sky, but it might have been one of those. And I said, okay, God, if you're there, if you exist, if you're there, you have to reveal yourself to me. You have to show me that you're there. Otherwise, I'm never going to believe ever. And with that, I left Paris. And I ended up going back to Israel. And I went back to my old kibbutz. And they wouldn't let me back on. Okay? They wouldn't let me back. That's a whole long story. I'm not going to get into that either. They wouldn't let me back on. And I told some of the Christians in the Christian group what happened in Paris. I said, look, I'm open. And if your God is there, he's got to reveal himself to me. You just say to believe and have faith. I don't believe in Bastet, the cat goddess of Egypt, for I can believe in Jesus. And the guy said, you ask, he'll respond. Well, all right, fine. Well, anyway, because they won't let me back on my old kibbutz, I go to the main kibbutz office in Tel Aviv to get assigned to another kibbutz. And I'm in the office, and there's a woman at the desk, and there's a guy sitting at the desk ahead of me, and I'm just waiting my turn, and I look on the desk, and I see a sheet of paper, and it says Clifford Goldstein. So I interrupted the woman. And I said, excuse me, ma'am, how did you know I was coming? And she says, I don't know who you are. And I said, Clifford Goldstein. Well, the guy who was sitting there, he jumps up and says, no, that's my paper. My name is Clifford Goldstein. All right, so, Clifford Goldstein's not the most common name in the world, I'll admit. But folks, where were we? Okay? Where were we? Okay, this was Israel. And he was there to get assigned to a kibbutz. And I said, Cliff, where are you from? And he said, Miami Beach. And I said, I came from Miami Beach. In fact, when I was a kid, we used to get some doctor bills, like 10, 12 years older, used to come to our house for Clifford Goldstein for appointments. And they must have been his doctor bills coming to the house because we had the same doctor. Well, he was there to get assigned to a kibbutz. And I said, Cliff, have I got the kibbutz for you? Okay, you go to that kibbutz and you tell them your name is Clifford Goldstein and you're from Miami Beach. So he goes to the kibbutz, okay? He goes. Well, anyway, I'm running around Israel for about 2 weeks. I'm just not getting it together. It's just not getting it together. So I'm going to come back to the States. So I go to the old kibbutz for a visit. So I go to the kibbutz, and of all the different rooms, Clifford Goldstein's in the room that I had been in when I had lived there a few months earlier. He's in the same room. And I didn't put him there because I had been there, because people came and went all the time. And there had been 2 beds in the room. And he was in the same bed that I had slept in when I was there. So we're just sitting there and we're just talking. And as I said, when I was in Israel, I just read, and I read a lot of poetry books and all that. And I had left my poetry books, all my books, on the bookshelf right above the bed, because I travel with a light backpack. And so I'm sitting there, and I notice a number of my books. I'm going to have to go 5 minutes over. You're just killing me on this. It's just going to have to go 5. You can hang me later, but I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Anyway, all these books are on the bookshelf. And I look up, and I notice a number of my old books on the bookshelf. And I said, "Hey, Cliff, you like my books?" And he says, "No." He says, "Those are all my books." And I say, And I reach up and I grab the Sylvia Plath book. Remember I told you there's one book of poetry by Sylvia. Nothing I had read that book just devastated me. And here's the same author, same title, same everything, but it's his book, not my book, sitting right on the shelf. And for some reason, I looked at Clifford Goldstein. And I said, "Cliff, are you a writer?" And he says, "Yes, I'm a writer, and I've come to Israel to write." Okay? We're not done. Right about that time as we're talking, this girl enters the room. I'd never seen her before. She's got blonde hair, and she's from Denmark, and it's his girlfriend. And he says, "Cliff, you'll never guess what her name is." And I say, "Don't tell me." Her name was Tina. Okay? Okay, I'm telling you, this is exactly what happened. Now, talk about getting my attention. Now, I can tell people this story. I could tell you this story. But believe me, you had to have been there. Okay? And I didn't know. And I remember going down to the Christians, and everybody was freaked out on the kibbutz about what was going on. But the Christians were real nonchalant about it. And this one guy, he said, "Look, Cliff, you were asking God for signs." He says, "What more do you want?" He said, "The Lord's calling you by name." And when he said that, I remember I stepped outside, and I'm thinking about this. And I can remember the moment. It was 1979. I can remember the moment, and I'm thinking, and I'm realizing this just couldn't be a coincidence. And if it couldn't be a coincidence, then it had to be, and it was like, it was the first time in my life I kind of looked up in the sky with a little bit of fear, a little bit of reverence, okay? And anyway, the next day, these Christians whom I harangued and harassed the whole year, they took me down the Jordan River. This is all backwards now, the way it is. They took me down the Jordan River and they baptized me, okay? And they gave me a Bible, okay? And I come back to the States, okay? I come back to the States and I go back to Gainesville, Florida. And it was heavy meat in my double. So I knew there was another realm out there. I knew there was another realm of existence and so on, but nothing really changed. I had a Bible, and I tried reading the Bible, but I couldn't get, if you're not with it, I couldn't get past the talking snake story. It was like just nothing clicked. Now, I want a very quick backtrack, and then I'm going to try to wrap this up in 7-8 minutes, all right? The clock is just, I don't see the guy there flashing the sign in front of me, so that gives me a little bit of leeway, I think. Anyway, I want to backtrack. I get back to Israel after I was there, and I lay down one afternoon to take a nap, and I feel this strange little tingling in my toes. And I feel this vibration and this vibrating, and I get this pounding sensation, and I get this sensation I'm floating through a wind tunnel. Very loud and shaking, and I sit up and I'm shaking. I thought, what was that? And then it starts to happen to me again, this tingling in my toes and this rolling up, and I get this sensation, like I'm going through this wind tunnel, and I stand up and I thought, what in the world is going on? I had no idea what this was. Then I said, okay, the next time that I come back to the States and it keeps happening, and I said, the next time it happens, don't fight it. So I'm back in Gainesville, Florida. I said, I got my Bible, but no, I'm not born again. I don't know Jesus. I don't have any kind of relationship with him. My God, I said I couldn't read past the snake story. Well, one afternoon I lay down to take a nap, and I get the tingling in my toes and the rolling up and the pounding in my head, and I say, don't fight it, don't fight it. And the next thing I know is zoosh. I feel myself go right out of my body. And I remember going right through the roof. And the next thing you know, I'm hovering in the air in this gray, crackly mist right outside the room of some friends of mine who were trying to get me into their guru. Okay? Now, let me explain. I am a hardcore Seventh-day Adventist today. I understand today perfectly, well, a perfectly mind-body relationship. I don't have the vaguest idea how it works. But the point is, I'm hardcore. There's no such thing. All right, he's giving me the sign there. No, all right. I have, that point, nothing. Anybody could have convinced me that that wasn't my soul leaving my body. Okay? Even though I know now that, well, anyway, I decide, hey, maybe the occult, maybe spiritualism. That's where truth is. Because this stuff was real. And so I decide I'm going to start studying the occult. I'm going to start studying spiritualism. So the next day I go over to the library to get a book on the occult, to get a book on spiritualism. And as I go over, I walk over to the library, and I get this book. First time, I read the first chapter. I don't even tell people what it is. I'm going to practice the first technique. I do it, and then I'm walking through the library. But on the way over there, I happen to stop at a health food store. And I tell the guy in the health food store what I'm into, and he tries to warn me, and he says, here, read this book, and he gives me a book. And I go over to the library, and I'm practicing the first technique, and I'm walking through the library, and literally, for the first time in my life, I've got in one hand this book on the occult and spiritualism. Oh, you give me that now. He's added 10 minutes to it. All right, you distorted everything on me. All right, that's serious, huh? Oh, all right. All right, let me unwind here a little bit, because I'm trying. I wish you could have done that to me 10 minutes ago, but whatever. All right, here's the bottom line. I'm having these occult experiences. I don't know anything about the state of the dead. All I know is the way I interpret it, that was my soul leaving my body. And I thought, maybe here is where the truth is that I'm looking for. So as I said, I'm going to study the occult. And on my way over, I stop at this. I'm looking for a job. I'm back in Gainesville, Florida. I have no money. I've got nothing. I'm just eking out an existence because all I want to do is write my novel. I mean, I was a typical starving artist. I was 23. All that mattered to me was this book. So any way at all, I can just survive as long as I could write. So I see this health food store, and I figured, all right, I'm on my way over to get the book on the occult. So I stop at the health food store, and I knock on the door, and this guy comes out of the health food store. He's a Hungarian. And I mention to him something about religion. I say something, and he says, what? And he pulls me in the store, and he locks the door. And I start telling about my occult experiences. And he starts to warn me about the devil. He starts warning me, not talking to me about the devil. He might as well told me about Santa Claus, the devil, And he warns me, but he says, here, read this book. So he hands me a book. Okay, so I take this book, and I go over to the library, and I get the book on the occult. Okay, and I'm sitting there, and I'm practicing the first technique in the library with the occult, okay? And I wasn't in college then, so I couldn't check the book out. So I put the book, I'm just going to go put the book back. I'm not going to put it back where it belongs. I hide it somewhere so nobody can check it out so I can get it later. So I put it back, but the point is I'm walking through the library. And literally, for the first time in my life, in one hand, first time I got a book on the occult and spiritualism. First time that I'm getting into. Because up until then I thought it was all just nonsense. But I had these experiences, so I knew there's something there. So I got that book literally in one hand. And I'm telling you, literally, I'm walking through the library in my other hand, I got the book that the guy handed me in the health food store. Which book do you think it was? It was The Great Controversy. Okay? And I got one book in one hand, one book in the other, and I'm telling you, I had no idea of what was going down. I mean, I had no idea of what was happening. And I started reading The Great Con. I was getting into it. I read first 3 chapters. I read up until she started lauding Martin Luther. Jews, we have a real hard time with Martin Luther, and that's a whole other story. So I didn't get that far in the book. But anyway, that's where we're at. A couple days later, Gainesville, Florida, fall of 1979, 23 years old. I'm walking back to my room to work on my novel. 2.5 years of my life was in that novel. And when you're 23, 2.5 years is, it's everything. At that point, the book was going better than it had ever gone. I just knew I was just going to write this novel, and if it wasn't any good, then I was going to start over and I was going to write another one. And I didn't care how long, if I had to write it over, nothing else mattered to me. I was going to be a novelist or nothing. Book was going better than it had ever gone. If somebody would have come in and had torn a page, I would have defended it with my life because I had nothing else. And at that point, did you ask me, did I believe in God? Did I believe in Jesus? Well, I kind of mellowed out about Jesus. I mean, I'd been baptized already, so, kind of nice. And those Christians were so kind and loving to me that I really couldn't use all the the historical anti-Semitism as the excuse. And because of the occult stuff and meeting my double, I knew there was something else out there. But that was it. That was it. Nothing changed. Nothing changed. And I go back to my room. The sun is setting. My little room in the student ghetto in Gainesville, Florida. Man, I still can't believe that happened. And I go back to my room. I was 23. And I got this little, and I always have to make sure I explain this, because later on people wonder why didn't I have it backed up on my hard drive. But I had a manual typewriter. Okay? I'm working on my novel on a manual typewriter. And I sit down, put a sheet of paper in the thing, crank it, put my finger on the keys. And then at that moment, as real as anything that ever happened to me, the presence of the Lord Jesus Christ came into the room. And in that exact instant, I knew who He was. There was never a doubt. I knew who He was, and I knew what He wanted. In an instant, He showed me. In an instant, He brought it all to me. He said to me, literally, Cliff, you have been playing with me long enough. If, don't forget that if, because that's the most important word in this whole thing. If you want me tonight, burn the novel. Okay? If you want me tonight, burn the novel. Because in that instant He showed me that novel was my God. Pure and simple. I didn't know anything about the 10 Commandments. I knew where all the Nazi concentration camps were, but I couldn't have named you 5 of the 10 Commandments. But at that moment, He showed me, you shall have no other gods before me. If you want me, because the whole time this thing happened, I realized during this whole experience for the next few hours, I realized I didn't have to do it. I mean, I had free will. And He said, if you want me tonight, burn the novel. And I said, God, please let me finish the book, and then I'll give my life to you. If you want me tonight, burn the novel. And I said, God, please, I'll rewrite it all to your glory. If I didn't have to do it, this is the amazing thing. The whole time this is going on, I'm aware I could just say, shoo, shoo. He says, if you want me tonight, burn the novel. And I finally said, look, can't we just put this away and talk about it another time? Burn the book. And I remember I just jumped up and I just burst into tears. I mean, people, I could have cut my arm off. I could have cut my throat. I had nothing. I had nothing but that book. My friends were getting degrees in this and doing that, and I poured everything into this book, and to give it up, I mean, I literally had nothing left, and I ran out of the room, and I was running through the streets of Gainesville, Florida. Those were the same streets that I was running through when I ran through that pizza parlor. Remember? When I walked out of that pizza parlor thinking, when it hit me that truth had to exist, I said, I wanted to know it no matter the cost. And suddenly now, 3 years later, I was confronted with the cost, and I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And I'm walking through those streets, and just, a whole bunch of stuff is going through my mind. You can imagine. And then finally, I don't even remember how long it was, I stop underneath this street lamp. And I always remember the detail. These bugs were flying around the lamp, and they're casting their shadows on the ground, and I stop underneath that street lamp. And finally I said, okay, God, I want you and I want truth more than I want this book. But if you want it burned, you're going to have to burn it for me. And God might not force, but I did sort of feel this little grip around my neck, okay? But I'm telling you, the moment I made the choice, it was all the action of the will. You remember Ellen White said about the will? The moment I made that choice, I said, the moment I surrendered, I said, okay, God, I want you, I want truth more than I want this book. The moment I made that choice, everything just lifted right off of me. And I had no idea I was a sinner. I mean, you would have looked at me and told me I was a sinner. I would have looked at you like you came from Mars. I had no concept of atonement. I didn't know squat about Adventists, three angels, I mean, I knew nothing about anything. But knowing nothing about any of that, having no idea what was happening to me, I walked back to my room, and there's my manuscript. 2.5 years of my life. That's all I had, folks. I had nothing else. And I had this little hot plate on the floor that my mother had bought me, I guess in hopes I'd cook something. Little did she know. And try explaining the story to your Jewish mother, but that's another, And I took that manuscript now at that point, without a qualm, without a doubt, without knowing anything, though. Just knowing. And I laid that manuscript, took everything on the burner, turned, right there in the room, right there in my room, laid it on there, turned the switch, and burned the novel. And that was the night I became a born-again believer in Jesus. And that was 1979. And I can honestly say, for not 1 second, not 1 nanosecond in all those years have I ever been sorry I burned that book. I shudder to think what would have happened to me. You never know. God can reach you, but there's just a thing in me which says to me, had I not burned that book that night, kind of what I do with Adventism, I probably would be doing some degree with the New Age and the occult because I was getting into that. But had I not burned that book that night, I don't think I ever could have been saved. But I burned the book that night. I became a born-again believer. And those occult experiences, very quickly, I want to wrap this up. You ever read these stories about these people who die and then come back to life with these near-death experiences, and they talk about floating through a mist and all that, and they meet. I had those exact experiences, but I wasn't anywhere near dead. I'm convinced it was through the influence of that guy in Denmark, in the occult. The devil's religious. The devil's religious. He's spiritual. He saw that I was interested in spiritual things, and he gave me something spiritual. I'm convinced it's all supernatural hallucinations. Because these people float outside their body and they meet their dead relatives. So what's going on there? But the moment I burned that novel that night, those occult experiences never came back. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. And then just two last things as I wrap this up, because I'm definitely over my time here. And the guy was warning us about time. Too bad, I leave tomorrow anyway. So these are Adventists in a health food store. I start studying with them in the health food store. And about 2 or 3 weeks go by, and I'm standing in front of the health food store. And I'm getting ready to cross the street. Car drives by. I see this car. And I think, all right, do I want to cross or do I want to wait? So I decide I'll wait. So I stop and I wait. And this car goes by. And who do you think's in the car? Clifford Goldstein. Last time I saw him was in the Galilee. Now that was a trip. And then finally, that preacher I used to harass, Jed Smock. You know, it's so funny. I've told this story years to my kids. My kids have been hearing me tell this story. And the other day I got them on YouTube. And I showed them Jed Smock on YouTube being harassed by students. And I said, I used to do that 25 years ago, my kids. But Jed Smock came back to town, and I got right on his heels, right like I used to, only this time I witnessed with him to students in the crowd. And here's the point. Let me wrap this up now before they come up here with a hook and pull me off. And because in many ways this is the punchline. When I burned that novel that night, I realized I might not ever write again. It was over. The only thing in the world I cared about, only thing in the world I had any interest in, only thing in the world I can do halfway, only thing in the world I can get motivated. You want to see my wife trying to get me to fix a faucet in the house or something. All that mattered to me was writing. And when I burned the novel that night, I figured it was done. I had died to it. And I realized I might not ever write again, and it was just dead. And then and I didn't do any writing for about 1.5 years. Then one day, door opened for me to write an article. And I wrote it. And you'll never guess what it was on. Vegetarianism. But the point is, I wrote that article, and I haven't stopped writing since. And I think that, more than anything else, really should give the moral to the story. Let's pray. Let me pray. And as we close, I'm just going to say, if there's somebody here, take a young person, maybe you got something. It might not be evil in it. That novel wasn't evil in and of itself. But it was my relationship to it. It was my God. And that's why it had to go. Think about it. Okay. Heavenly Father, I just thank you again for just the miraculous way in which you've led in this one sinner's life. And I look back and I marvel at what you did for me to bring me from where I was to this wonderful truth. And Lord, I don't know most of the people here. I don't know anybody's hearts. But Lord, maybe if there's even one person here, Father, one person who's got something that they're clinging to, some quote-unquote book, something that they're holding on to that means more than you, Lord, I pray that you'll bring conviction, that your Spirit will touch that heart. Oh, Lord, it might not be with all the bells and whistles and drama of what happened to me. That's irrelevant. What matters is that each of us at some point make a complete surrender. And so I pray that if there's somebody here, anybody, young, old, they could be in the church many years, it doesn't matter. If there's something that they're clinging to, Lord, I pray, just as you came to me that night, many, many years ago, and convicted me that it had to go, that I pray that the same Lord, that you will come to this person, whoever they are, or people, whomever they are, and you will touch them in their hearts, and that they will use this amazing and very costly gift of free will that you've given us, that they will make the choice to surrender all for you. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.